We continue now at the top of Daf Vav Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 26a. This daf is sponsored by David and Ariella Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, see the description box below, and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, Rabbi Ami said that Rabbi Lozer said, if you have an animal where its legs are outside of the Azora, but the rest of the body is in the Azora, so then if you first cut off the legs and then you do the Shechita, then it would be kosher. The idea is that then the blood from outside of the Azora is not mixing by the Kabbalas Hadam, by the receiving of the blood. And the Gemara now continues, Shochat v'yachar kachotach. However, if he does the shechita, he slaughters the animal and then he cuts off the legs, so then psula, then it's going to be disqualified. Again, the idea would be that in such a situation, the Kabbalas Hadam is including the blood from outside of the Azora, from those legs that are outside of the Azora, and that is why that is problematic. And the Gemara questions this statement, Chotach v'yachar kach shochat. In the first case, he said that if you cut off the legs first and then you do the shechita, so then ksheira, then it's kosher. That doesn't make any sense. Baal mum kamakriv. In that case, he's offering a baal mum. He's now made the animal into a baal mum, so you're not able to offer a baal mum. That would not make any sense. And so therefore the Gemara revises the statement. Ela ema, rather say as follows, Chotach v'yachar kach kibel ksheira. What happens is as follows. He does the shechita when the animal is whole. The animal does not have any blemish. And then if he cuts off the legs and then does the Kabbalas Hadam, that's kosher, because then it's considered like he's receiving all the blood that's within the Azora. But kibel v'yachar kachotach, but if he first receives the blood and then he cuts off the legs, then psula, then it will be disqualified. And Rashi explains, Hachi garsinan shachat v'yachar kachotach psula balas mum kamakriv. Again, the Gemara's question was, and this should be reversed really in Rashi, it should be by chotach v'yachar kach shachat, isn't it a balas mum? Ela ema chotach v'yachar kach kibel. Rather what happened was, he cut off the legs and then did the Kabbalas Hadam, meaning shechotcho bein shchita lekabbalah. If he cuts off the legs between the shchita and the Kabbalah, then kesheira, then it will be kosher. But the Gemara continues and asks, Chotach v'yachar kach kibel ksheira, is it really kosher if he cuts off the legs and then he does the Kabbalas Hadam, he receives the blood? V'yamar Rabbi Zera, but Rabbi Zera said, we quoted this on the previous Amud, Hatzorim ozen bevachor, if he nicks the ear of a bechor. On the previous Amud, the girsa was par, of a bull, and so some changed the girsa over here to par as well. In any case, if he makes that blemish by nicking the ear after the shechita, v'yachar kach kibel damu, and then he does the Kabbalas Hadam, puzzle, it's actually disqualified, meaning even if there's a blemish after the shechita, it's problematic. So how can you say that chotach v'yachar kach kibel is kosher? And how do we know that? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, v'lokach midam hapar, he takes from the blood of the par. That's the pasuk that indicates the concept of Kabbalas Hadam, of receiving the blood, and we understand that to mean par shahaya kavar. We understand that to mean the bull that was before, that already was, meaning to say it cannot be with a blemish even at the time of the Kabbalas Hadam. And so the Gemara instead says, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Avimi. Rav Chisda says that Avimi says that when we say chotach v'yachar kach kibel ksheira, that's only chotech be'ever ad shemagia le'etzem. That's if he cuts the limb until he reaches the bone, but he doesn't cut any further. And so then in such a situation that is not considered a mum, once it's not considered a mum, this is no longer problematic. It's no longer bal mum kamakriv, and so therefore in this case it's no longer a bal mum that he's receiving the blood from, and therefore it is kosher. And the Gemara continues, we said, Kibel v'yachar kach chotach psula, that if he receives the blood and then he cuts off the legs, again, the legs are outside of the Azora, so then it's disqualified because the blood from the legs which are outside of the Azora, they're considered to have mixed in with the blood that was received. And the Gemara says, Shamat minad, we see from here that dam hamuvla be'evorim, damhu, that you have the blood that's absorbed within the limbs like the legs, is that really considered to be blood? Rashi explains, Shma minod dam hamuvla be'evorim damu. Do we see from here that the dam that is muvla be'evorim is dam? The kares nami l'chayiv. That would mean that it's considered to be blood. You should be chayiv kares on such blood. The lo have a dam, because if it's not considered to be blood, ahecha chayil psul yotze. So what is the psul of yotze? That disqualification of leaving the Azora, it has nothing to be chal on. It's amaya bialma. It's just like regular. It's like mere water, and so therefore it must be that it's considered the status of blood. Do we really see that from this halacha? And the Gemara continues and answers, Dilma mishum shamnunis. Maybe really the psul is nothing to do with the dam hamuvla be'evarim, because that's not considered to be dam, but the reason is because of the shamnunis, which literally means the fats. Rashi explains, Dilma mishum shamnunis dechazio la'achila v'chashivi kebasar. We're talking about the fat which is fit to be eaten, and it's considered like basar le'efsule beyotze, and there is a psul yotze, there's a disqualification of yotze by the basar, by the meat of the animal. Kidechsiv, as it's written, uvasar basar basad treifa. We learn it out from the pasuk of uvasar basad treifa. Umivla bedam haregel, and though that shamnunis is mixed in, it's absorbed within the blood that's in the leg. V'nafka derech beis hashchita, and it's going to come out through the beis hashchita. Upasla lo ledam shavemizrak, and that's going to be what disqualifies the blood that is in the bowl. That's what the Gemara answers. But the Gemara continues and asks, Shamat mina, but do we see from here that besar kachim kalim, that the meat of kachim kalim, sheyatza lefnei zrikas dam, that leaves the azara before the zrikas dam, before the throwing of the blood puzzle, do we see from here that that is disqualified? And Rashi explains the question, Shma mina besar kachim kalim, sheyatza minhu azara lefnei zrika. Again, here you have the meat, the shamnunis is considered to be basar, the meat of kachim kalim, assuming that the carbon over here being discussed is kachim kalim, something like a carbon shlamim. So does that mean to say that the meat of kachim kalim that leaves the azara before zrika is puzzle is disqualified? Now what's the issue? Because when it comes to kachim kalim, the basar, the meat from kachim kalim, after the zrika, it actually is supposed to leave the azara, or rather it can leave the azara, because that meat can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. V'lios nechel b'chol ha'ir, it's eaten in the entire city. So in other words, we know that after zrika, there certainly is no psul of yotzei by kachim kalim. But the question then is, what about before the zrika? Hashtamiya lo mata zimne, now is not the time yet, it's not la'achar zrika yet, it's not the time that it's eaten throughout the city. So is there a psul of yotzei in that situation? That's what it seems to be that we're saying. Now, if that is the case, then this statement of Rav Ami from Rebbe Lazar is not like Rabbi Yochanan. He's going to say later on that by kachim kalim sheyatza lefnei zrikas dam, that basar that's yatza lefnei zrikas dam, he's going to say that that is not disqualified. But parakol hatadir, he's going to say that in parakol hatadir, and so therefore that would seem to go against what Rabbi Yochanan says. And the Gemara continues and answers, Dilma, maybe b'kachei kachim, maybe this statement of Rabbi Ami is really only going on kachei kachim, meaning this whole entire issue over here of a psul of yotzei, that if you have a situation where you're mekabel the blood and afterwards you cut off the legs, and so now you do have that mixture of the shamnunis, that really is only disqualified, and it was only an issue by kachei kachim. Rashi explains, Dilma ki amar Rabbi Ami amar Rabbi Lazar, maybe when Rabbi Ami made his statement from Rabbi Lazar, b'kachei kachim, it was by kachei kachim amar, that's where he said it, de mifsal lifnei zrika biyotzei ledivrei hakol. There everybody agrees it's disqualified if it's yotzei lifnei zrika, shein sofo lotzes, because kachei kachim has to be kept within the azara, even after the zrika it has to be kept within the azara. It's not like kachim kalim where the meat is eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, so maybe he was talking about kachei kachim. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, kachei kachim, when it comes to kachei kachim, again, that would be like a carbanola, carbon chatos. When it comes to kachei kachim, shchitason bitzafon, they have to be slaughtered in the north of the azara. V'kibul damon b'chli shares bitzafon, and also the receiving of the blood in the kli shares has to be done in the north of the azara. Amar b'darim, let's say he is standing in the south, v'hoshet yado letzafon v'shachat, and he stretches his hand out to the north and does the shchita so ksher, the shchita is kosher, meaning the idea is that the Kohen himself, or the person who is doing the shechita, does not necessarily need to be in the north. It's just the animal that needs to be in the north. Rashi explains, V'kibul daman b'chli shares b'tzafon, again the Kabbalah Saddam is also with the kli shares in the north, l'kamon yalfinan la be'ezim l'kom, and this will be learned out later on, to samach Kabbalah shchita, Kabbalah is near shchita, and so therefore, just like the shchita needs to be in the north, so too the Kabbalah needs to be in the north. Amad b'chelik deromi shel azara samach lemtza, if the one doing the shchita is standing in the southern part of the azara, but near the middle of the azara, and hoshet yado l'tzafon v'shachat shchita so ksher, if he stretches his hand out to the north and does the shchita, that's okay. L'kamon yalfinan la oso b'tzafon ve'ein hashochet b'tzafon. We're going to learn out that he needs to be, meaning the animal rather needs to be in the north, but he, the shochet, the slaughterer, the person doing the shchita, does not need to be in the north. Aval ha'mekabel, but we will say that the one who's receiving the blood, tzarech lios b'tzafon, he does need to be in the north. Hilkach kibel kabbalas psula. Therefore, if he receives in that fashion, again where he himself is not in the north, that actually would be disqualified. As the Brisa now continues, Kibel, again, if he receives in that fashion, meaning the Kohen is not in the north when he receives, Kabbalaso Psula, and so in such a situation, the receiving of the blood would be disqualified. This halacha that he can stretch his hand out to the north is only by Shchita and is not by Kabbalah. Hichnis Rosho V'rubo. Now let's say he has his head and the majority of his body in the north, so then Ki'ilu Nichnas Kulo, that's like he's entirely in the north. Rashi explains, Hichnis Rosho V'rubo B'tzafon, if he has his head and the majority majority of his body in the north, v'kibel, and he does the Kabbalas Hadam in that fashion, ki'ilu nichnas kulo. So then already it's like he's in the north entirely, and that is fine by the Kabbalas Hadam. Kedekaimelan b'chol Torah ruba kakulo, like we've established in the entire Torah, that a majority is like the entirety, and so therefore again in a situation of Rosho v'rubo, we're going to say that is as if he is in the north. And the Brisa continues, Pirchasa v'yotzta l'darom v'chazra. Let's say you slaughter the animal, and Pirchasa is when the animal is involuntarily shaking, it has tremors after you slaughter it, and let's say it moves to the south, and then it returns to the north, so then kashera, that is kosher. Rashi explains, Pirchasa la'achar shchita, so this Pirchasa happens again right after the shchita, the animal moves around, v'yotza l'darom, it goes to the south, v'chazra, and then it returns to the north, kashera, it's kosher. De'ein psul yotze ela mitoch ha'mechitzas. Now the idea over here is that it's not called yotze just because it leaves from the north to the south. It has to actually leave the azara to be called yotze. That's the point. And Rashi notes, v'hai v'chazra, when it says over here that it returns to the north, lav dafka, that's not even necessarily needs to be the case. The point over here just is that there is no psul yotze. Ela aidi deboy lemisni seifa, since at the end of the brisa we're going to say gabe pnim v'chutz, when it comes to inside and outside, v'chazra, there we are going to talk about returning, lashmin on ribusa, to teach a chiddush, that even though it returns, it's disqualified. Tana Reishan Ami v'chazra. So that's why over here also we say v'chazra, but really v'chazra is not necessary. The point over here is that yitzio l'darim, going out to the south, that's not considered to be a psul of yotze. You have to actually leave the azara, and that's why we say kshera. That's why we say that it's kosher in such a situation, and that is the brisa addressing kachei kachim. Now the brisa turns to kachim kalim. When it comes to kachim kalim, when it comes to the lighter forms of karbanos, again like a carbon shlamim or similar, so then shchitasan bifnim, so then we say that the slaughtering just has to be done in the azara. It doesn't have to be in the north of the azara, it just has to be in the azara. V'kibul daman b'chlisharis bifnim, and also the receiving of the blood in a klisharis is done within the azara. Amad b'chutz v'hichnes yadu lefnim v'shachat. Let's say he's standing outside the azara, he stretches his hand inside and he does the shchita. Shchita so kshera, so that shchita is kosher, similar to what we said when it comes to kachei kachim by the north. Kibel kabbalah so psula, but if he does the kabbalas hadam in that fashion, again similar to what we said by kachei kachim in the north, that is going to be disqualified. Hichnes rosho v'rubo. Now in this case, if he has his head and the majority of his body, ki'ilu lo nechnas, that is as if he has not entered, that is not considered to be within the azara. Having rosho v'rubo is not sufficient to be considered within the azara. Pirchasa, and again when the animal is moving around involuntarily after the shchita, v'yotzta lechutz, if it then leaves the azara, goes outside, v'chazra, and returns, psula, it is disqualified. In this case we're strict again. Once it leaves, there is a concept of yotze if it leaves the azara. And Rashi explains, shchitasan bifnim, when it comes to kachim kalim, the slaughtering is inside the azara. Techsib b'shlamim, it's written by shlamim, v'shachtu pesach ol moed, dahainu toch azara. It says you slaughter at pesach ol moed, the entrance of the ol moed, that really is the azara, that is the courtyard. V'kibul daman b'chlisharis bifnim, and then when it comes to receiving the blood, that also is in the azara. Kabbalah bifnim nafkalon milamod lifnei Hashem l'sharso. That we learn out from the pasuk, the idea that the Kabbalah has to be inside the azara. It says lifnei Hashem l'sharso, alma kol sheirus lifnei Hashem. You see that all serving, that has to be done before Hashem, it has to be in the azara. Amad b'chutz v'hoshet yadu b'fnim v'shachat shchitaso kshera. If he's standing outside, he stretches his hand inside to do the shchita, that is kosher. L'kamon v'perakol apsulin yalfin Allah. We're going to learn that later on in perakol apsulin. It says ben habokar lifnei Hashem. It says the animal has to be lifnei Hashem, v'lo hashochet lifnei Hashem, but the person doing the slaughtering does not have to be lifnei Hashem. And kibel kabbalah psula, if he receives in that fashion, that is disqualified. Kidafarishas, as we explained above, again we explained by kachei kachim also, when it comes to kabbalah, the person himself has to be there. Hichnis rosho v'rubo kilu lo nichnas. Then when it comes to the kachim kalim in the azara, if the majority of his body and his head is in the azara, that is not considered being in the azara. Kidi alfin l'kaman b'shmaitin. This is going to be learned later on in the sugya, bevoim elo al moed. It says in the pasuk, bevoim elo al moed. Now the context of that pasuk is actually entering into the heichal, and we understand that to mean ad sheyavo kulo, his entirety needs to enter into the heichal. V'gabe azara. And so then when it comes to the azara, which is what we're discussing here, t'chsev yamod lifnei Hashem, where it says he stands before Hashem, boy nami kula. We say also there's a requirement his entirety needs to be in the azara. Dekevan de goli b'chad, goli b'kula. Once we understand it in that situation of bevom elo al moed, we understand it over here as well. V'hachi amar b'shmaitin. That's what we're going to say in the sugya. Pirchasa, and again in a situation where the animal is moving involuntarily after the slaughtering, let's say it moves outside of the azara, Azara. Liachar shchita, after the slaughtering, v'yatsa lechutz, it goes out, v'chazr, and returns, psula, it is disqualified. The ifsula biyotze, that is the disqualification of leaving the Azara. Kedegamrinan psul yotze b'psachim, we learn the disqualification of yotze Meseches psachim, b'keitzat solin and parakeitzat solin, mehein luhuva es dama el hakodesh penima umibasar basad treifa. Those are the psukim that discuss the psul, the disqualification of yotze. And the Gemara continues and asks the same question it asked above. Shma mina, do we see from this brisa that besar kachim kalim, that if you have the meat of kachim kalim, sheyotza, that they leave the azara, that meat leaves the azara lifnei zrikas damim, before the zrikas damim psulim, that's disqualified. Again, that's what it seems we're saying over here. Here you have a situation before the zrika, the animal involuntarily, after the shchita, again it leaves the azara, and we're saying that is a psul yotze. That would indicate that by besar kachim kalim, that leave before the zrikas damim, that is a disqualification. And the Gemara says not necessarily dilma ba'aliyah v'yoseres hakaved ushtei klayos. Maybe the reference to the psul yotze over here, specifically by the tail, the diaphragm, and the two kidneys, so those are considered to have a higher level of sanctity, and that's why there's a psul yotze. Rashi explains, Dilma hadikatani psula, maybe when it says disqualified over here, ba'aliyah v'yoseres, again we're talking about the aliyah, the yoseres hakaved, the emurin ninhu, those are the sacrificial portions that are actually brought on the mizbeach, the emure kachim kalim, and the rule is that the emurim of kachim kalim, kachay kachimein, those count as kachay kachim, and that's why there's a psul yotze, but maybe enochanami, there would not be a psul yotze by the basar. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei avua de Shmuel mishmuel, the father of Shmuel asked Shmuel the following question. He bifnim, let's say the animal is within the azara, v'ragleh b'chutz, but its legs are outside of the azara, mahu, what's the halacha in such a situation? And Rashi explains the question, he bifnim mahu l'shochta l'chatchila. The question over here is, l'chatchila, are you allowed to slaughter an animal in such a fashion? Again, the legs are outside of the azara, and the animal itself, where you're doing the slaughtering, that part of the animal is inside the azara. What's the halacha? And the Gemara says, Amar Lei said to him, Ksiv, it's written in the pasuk, V'haviyum l'Hashem, you bring them to Hashem, Achetei kula lifnim, it has to be entirely lifnim, it has to be entirely in the azara. Again, lichatchila, the entire animal has to be in the azara when you do the shchita. And the Gemara continues, Tola v'shachad ma, what if you suspend the animal in midair and you do the shchita in that fashion? What's the halacha? Amar Lei said, Kasher, in that situation, it is kosher. Amar Lei said to him, Ishtabasht, you're making a mistake over here. Ba'inon shchita al yerech, it needs to be a slaughtering on the al yerech hamizbeach, it has to be on the side of the mizbeach. V'lekan, you don't have that in this situation. And Rashi explains, Tala habehima ba'avir ha'azara, if he suspends the animal in the airspace of the azara, so is that kosher? And initially he says kosher, but he says no, al yerech is mashma etzla. When it says al yerech, it's mashma, it has to be next to the mizbeach, and so therefore again, if it's suspended in the air, that will not be a good shchita. And the Gemara continues and asks, what about nisla? What if you have a situation where the person doing the shchita is suspended in the air? V'shachar, he does shchita like that. Ma'u, what's the halacha? Amar le psuli, said that's disqualified. Amar le said to mishtabish, you're making a mistake over here as well, because shchita al yerech, the slaughtering, meaning the animal, has to be next to the mizbeach. V'lo shochet al yerech, but the shochet, the person doing the slaughtering, he does not need to be al yerech, and so therefore he is allowed to be suspended in the air. Rashi explains, nisla hashochet ba'avir ha'azara ma'u. Let's say the shochet, he's suspended in the airspace of the azara. What's the halacha? Amar le psuli, said it's disqualified. Minei kagamar la. He's learning it from what he just said, because the shamar dekamar le talav v'shachat pasel, because he just heard him say that if the animal is suspended and it gets slaughtered, then we say disqualified. V'savar hu adin lenisla. He thought the same should be true for the nisla, for the person when the shochet is suspended in the air. And then again he responded that is not the case. By the shochet, it's not a problem if he's suspended in the air. And the Gemara continues, Nisla v'kibel mahua, what if the Kohen is suspended in the air when he receives the blood? What's the halacha there? Amar le setem ksheira, that should be kosher. And Rashi explains, Amar le ksheira setem kosher, kedamar le nisla v'shachat. He thought it would be kosher, because why is that any different than the case of Nisla, the case where the shochet is suspended in the air? If that's kosher, so then it should be kosher in this case as well. And again, Amar le setem ishtabish, you're making a mistake. Ein derech sheirus bekach, that's not the way of serving in the Beis HaMikdash. That's not sheirus, and when it comes to Kabbalah Saddam, that's considered sheirus, that's considered to be serving, and so therefore it would be disqualified. And the Gemara continues, Tala v'kibel ma'u, what about a situation where he suspends the animal in the air in order to receive the blood? Amar le psula, so he said in that situation it should be disqualified. Amar le said to mishtabish, you're making a mistake, because shchita al yerech, the slaughtering has to be that the animal is next to the mizbeach, v'lo kabbalah al yerech, but when it comes to the receiving of the blood, the animal does not need to be next to the mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Amar le psula, he said to him, it's disqualified. Mine gomer, again, he learned from him. Kid Amar le betala v'shachat uvenisla v'kibel. Again, he said by tala v'shachat and nisla v'kibel. V'savar hoadin latala v'kibel. So he thought the same thing is true. When you suspend the animal in the air and receive the blood, that also should be disqualified. And again, the response was that it is not disqualified. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, B'kotchei kotchem, by cases of kotchei kotchem, by the holy of holy types of karbanos, again, like a carbanola, like a carbon chatos. So in all of the cases above, kulam psulos, in all of the cases above, it would be disqualified, again, whether the person is suspended, the animal is suspended, bar minisla v'shachat, with the exception when the shochet is suspended in the air and he does the shchita, so there, that actually is going to be kosher by kotchei kotchem. And b'kotchem kalim, and when it comes to kotchem kalim, when it comes to like carbon shlam, the lighter types of kedusha, so kulan kashero. So then all of the cases we said above are actually going to be kosher. Bar min nisla v'kiba, with the exception of the case of nisla, that again refers to the case to the situation where the kohen is suspended in the air and he receives the blood. That would be disqualified. And Rashi explains, b'kotchei kotchem, by kotchei kotchem dichsiv, because by kotchei kotchem it's written behu al yerech. There it's written al yerech, so it has to be next to the mizbeach. Suspended is going to be a problem. So kulan psulin bar min nisla v'shachad. Everything will be disqualified except where the person doing the shchita suspended in the air. The v'shochet lo ksiv yerech, because it doesn't say the word yerech by the shochet. Ela b'nishchad, it's only by the animal being slaughtered. K'dechsiv oso al yerech, like it says in the pasuk again. Avol tola v'kibel, let's say in a situation where he suspends the animal in the air and then receives the blood, psula, so that's going to be disqualified. Da'avir tzafon, because being in the airspace of the north of the Azara, lav kitzafon dami, that's not considered north. Uva'inon kabbalah b'tzafon, it needs to be kabbalah in the north, kedagamrinon be'ezu makomon, like we're going to learn later on in ezu makomon. V'afagav delochsiv yerech b'kabbalah. Now, even though it doesn't say the word yerech by kabbalah, tzafon miyok siv ba, it does say the word tzafon, so it has to be counted as tzafon. And b'kotchem kalim, when it comes to kotchem kalim, lo ksibu al yerech, it doesn't say al yerech, that's why suspended in the air is not a problem. V'lo ksibu tzafon, it also doesn't say north, so therefore kulam ksherim, they're all going to be kosher. Bar minisla v'kibel, except for the case where the kohen is suspended in the air in order to receive the blood, the ein derech sherus bekach, because that's not the proper way of doing sherus, of serving in the Beis HaMikdash. But the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Ma'ishna tala v'kibel b'kotchem kalim d'ksheira. What's the difference? The case where the animal is suspended in the air and you do the kabbalah sadam by kotchem kalim, that we're saying it's kosher, da'avir pnim kipnim dami, because the airspace within the Azara is considered to be within the Azara. So b'kotchei kotchem nami, when it comes to kotchei kotchem as well, avir tzafon kitzafon dami, you're learning it out from the fact that it says tzafon, but the airspace of the north should be considered like the north, and therefore Rava disagrees with Abaya. So Elam Rava, rather Rava says, Bein b'kotchei kotchem, bein b'kotchem kalim, whether you're talking about kotchei kotchem or kotchem kalim, kasheros, it's going to be kosher, bar min tala v'shachat b'kotchei kotchem, except for the case where you suspend the animal in the air and slaughter the animal by kotchei kotchem, because again, there you have the issue of al yerech, and nisla v'kibel, if let's say the person is suspended in the air in order to receive the blood, bein b'kotchei kotchem, bein b'kotchem kalim, so then, both by kotchei kotchem and by kotchem kalim, that's going to be problematic. Again, as we said, that's a problem that it's not considered to be sherus, it's not considered to be properly serving in the Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi explains, da'avir pnim kipnim dami, again, the airspace within the Azara is considered in the Azara, do'al karchach pnim miyuksibu, it does say pnim by kotchem kalim, umodis da'avir pnim kipnim, and you're admitting that the airspace of in the Azara is considered in the Azara, imkain b'kotchei kotchem, if so, by kotchei kotchem, amai polagta adavua de Shmuel, why are you arguing on the father of Shmuel, betala v'kibel, by the case of tala v'kibel, when the animal is suspended and you receive the blood, leimanami avir tzafon kitzafon dami, we should say the airspace of the north is considered like the north. So Ela Amar Rava, rather Rava says, kula kavua de Shmuel ka'amar lo, it's all like the father of Shmuel, Ela de avua de Shmuel lo airi b'kotchem kalim, it's just that the father of Shmuel wasn't dealing with kotchem kalim, and so Rava explains, bar min tala v'shachat b'kotchei kotchem, in a case where the animal is suspended and slaughtered by kotchei kotchem, that will be a problem. Tvinon al yerech, because it needs to be al yerech. Avol b'kotchem kalim d'loksiv al yerech ksheira, but by kotchem kalim it doesn't say al yerech, so it's kosher. And tala v'kibel kosher, so therefore if the animal is suspended and you do the kabbalah, you receive the blood, it's kosher. B'chulon, that's going to be kosher by all of them. The derech sheirus bekach, that's considered sheirus, that's considered serving. V'aver tzafon kitzafon dami, and again the airspace of the north is like the north. Uva kabbalah lochsev al yerech, it never says al yerech. Yerech by Kabbalah. However, V'nisla v'kivel bein b'kotchim, if he himself is suspended by the Kabbalah, Nami Pasal, that's disqualified. The Kabbalah Sheirasi, because Kabbalah, receiving the blood, is considered Sheiras. Ve'in derech Sheiras b'kach, that's not considered Sheiras when he is suspended in the air. Avol Nisla v'shachar k'sheira, but if he's suspended in the air to do the Shechita, that is okay. The Shechita lav Sheirasi, because Shechita is not considered to be serving. V'al yerech Nami lav v'shochet ksiv, it also doesn't say al yerech by shochet, ela b'beheman, that's not going on the person doing the slaughtering, that is going on the animal. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rabbi Yirmiyah, me Rabbi Zeir, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zeir the following question, Hu bifnim v'tzitzitzo b'chutz, let's say he's inside the Azara, and his fringes, that refers to his hair is outside the Azara. Mahu, what's the halach in that case? Amar Lei said to him, Lav Amrit v'heviyum l'Hashem, didn't you say that it says in the pasuk v'heviyum l'Hashem, which means ad shetavo kula lifnim, he has to be entirely inside, and hachanami here also, bevoam el oel moed, it says bevoam el oel moed, ad sheyavo kula li oel moed, has to be entirely in the oel moed, and so therefore that would be a problem. Rashi explains, tzitzitzo tzitzitz rosho dahainu saro, again tzitzitzo refers to the fringes of his head, which refers to his hair. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses the application of the blood. Nosno al gabi hakevish, let's say he places the blood on the ramp of the Mizbeach, which is not the proper place, or shalo keneged hayisod, he does it on the Mizbeach, but not corresponding to where the yisod, the base of the Mizbeach is, or nasan as hanitonin lamata lamala, let's say he places the blood that's supposed to go below, that means on the lower half of the Mizbeach, but he puts it on the upper half, v'yas hanitonin lamala lamata, or what's supposed to go on the upper half, he puts on the lower half, v'yas hanitonin bifnim b'chutz, so let's say the blood is supposed to go inside the heichol by the inner mizbeach area, but he does it on the outer mizbeach. V'es hanitonen b'chutz b'fnim, or the other way around, it's supposed to be on the outer mizbeach, he does it inside the heichol. Possible it's disqualified, v'ein bo kares, but in these situations there is no kares. And Rashi explains, Nisano lamatan damo, if he applies the blood al gabi hakevish, he places it on the ramp of the mizbeach, she'eno makom matan damim, that's not the proper place to put the blood. Oba mizbeach, where he applies the blood to the mizbeach, but shalo keneged hayisod, but not corresponding to the yisod of the mizbeach, the base of the mizbeach. V'alfinan lekamon, we learn later on, da'ola tu'una matan damim keneged hayisod, the ola, you have to place the blood corresponding to the yisod. She yisod ha-mizbeach lamata mi matan damim, meaning that the yisod of the mizbeach needs to be below where the blood is placed. And what does that come to exclude? Lemuute karen mizrachis dromis, that comes to exclude the southeastern corner of the mizbeach, to lo havalo yisod, there is no yisod over there, so you can't apply it in that area. Kedamrin and bezo mekomon, like we'll say later on in parak ezo mekomon. Or lamata mi chut hasikra, let's say placed below the chut hasikra, that would be on the lower half of the mizbeach, ve'ein bo kares, but there is no kares. Rashi says it means ein ba'achiloso kares, when he consumes that carbon, when he eats that carbon, there's no kares, if this was the problem in terms of where exactly the blood was placed. The Gemara will explain why this needs to be taught, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chavav Amud Beis.